Sonic Superstars, the latest of Sonic's 2D adventures, came out last October to mixed reception. There's really no clear consensus on this game. Nobody can seem to agree where it should be placed relative to other Sonic titles. Plenty of people really enjoyed the game, others hate it, though most fans seem to think it's just okay. Not the worst game, but not reaching the highs of something like Sonic 3 or Mania. Despite this, there's one thing that it seems everyone can agree on when it comes to Superstars. These bosses they're not very good. And yeah, I don't really have any hot takes when it comes to that. These fights are an absolute slog. While previous classic Sonic games bosses were as easy as whacking Eggman whenever you could, Superstars took the approach of making you wait a Sonic 06 load screen between every opportunity to attack. This could be due to this game's emphasis on multiplayer. Having 4 people whacking Eggman at one time would make the bosses of earlier games trivial. Still, these fights just aren't difficult enough to warrant these wait times, and rather than feeling the thrill of narrowly dodging attacks to squeeze in a hit, I just find myself bored and waiting around for the boss to decide I get to bash it. As I said, this seems to be the only thing Sonic fans can really agree on when it comes to this game. Nobody had fun here. However, there are 2 bosses in this game that I cannot agree with the general public on. Those being the final bosses of both the main and second campaigns, the Egg Fortress Zone bosses. I would call them by their proper names, but they don't have any. Like, I get that Sonic 2 and 3's final bosses were called the Death Egg Robot, so I guess Egg Fortress Robot works for the Eggman mech? But Fangs on the wiki is literally just unnamed Fang Robot. Can nobody come up with a better name? What is this? Now, to be clear, I understand people's frustrations with these bosses. I'll go into it more later, but I do think they can also fall into the same trap the rest of the game's bosses fall into. Fang specifically. I found myself tapping my foot on more than one occasion too. The issue is there, but I didn't have nearly as much contempt for it here as I did earlier in the game. At the end of Superstar's main campaign, Sonic falls into the lava-filled core of the Egg Fortress, equipped with a thin walkway littered with occasional obstacles before Eggman rises in his new giant mech. And can I just say how much I love this thing's design? It's so much bigger than the original Death Egg Robot, putting it about on par with Sonic 3's, and looks so much more armored and heavy, equipped with glowing cyan lights to emphasize the tech Eggman's using, and big angry eyebrows that resemble what you'd see on a samurai helmet. Genuinely really well designed stuff here. Because of its sheer size and distance from the player, Sonic can't attack it directly at first, instead having to rely on knocking back the blue missiles Eggman shoots out between a volley of red ones. These red and blue missiles were introduced in Mania, and were used earlier in this game for Speed Jungle Zone's Act 2 boss, so their mechanics have already been explained to the player. They don't have to figure that out in the final fight. What the player does need to figure out is that they can't attack Eggman from the front, instead having to run to the back of the mech to hit him. Eggman will shoot out this volley of missiles 3 times per cycle, which gives you more than enough time to book it to the back of the mech and locate the blue missile. The mech has 2 other attacks it'll switch between before cycling back to the missiles. Its second attack will always be this orange shield attack thing that flashes before being launched at Sonic. Some gaps you're able to just stand in and it won't touch you, while others have to be jumped through, but if you jump when the shield flashes yellow, you'll be safe every time. After a repeat of the missile attack, Eggman will swipe at the ground, causing it to cascade from behind you while sparks shoot from the ceiling. Just keep running while dodging the sparks. After a while, the floor will stop falling out and you can just focus on not getting hit. Later in the fight, Eggman will hit on either side of you, causing the platform to rise up. This can seem a little unpredictable at first, but even if you jump prematurely, I always found there was enough wiggle room to jump to the stable walkway before the platform fell down. Unlike previous bosses, I never found this boring or like I was just waiting around. The attack patterns were just the right difficulty to not be annoying, but still demanded my attention lest I get hit. Hit the mech 6 times and that's it, boss is done. Honestly, I don't understand why it only took 6 hits when most of the other bosses took 8, and the final bosses are usually... Oh... That's right, that was only Phase 1, baby! Did you forget that the whole gimmick of the Egg Fortress Zone was reversing time? Because Eggman sure didn't. In Phase 2, Eggman will start swiping at you from the left side of the screen, so you gotta book it to the right and react to obstacles to get out of the way in time. After a while of holding right to win, Eggman will tire out and faceplant onto the ground, letting you safely smack the top of his bald head. Later on, this will follow a spinning attack that you need to jump over, but it's super easy. One of the other attacks in this phase is him shooting out these yellow beams that can easily be jumped over, and are actually 100% consistent every time he attacks. Yeah, there's no RNG to this one, it's middle, top and bottom every time. I honestly wish this wasn't so predictable, it makes this part completely trivial. The last of Phase 2's attacks involves Eggman activating anti-gravity, as seen in the stage preceding the fight, and shooting out electric orbs. While your movement is a little sluggish, the mech's egg noggin is fully vulnerable during this attack, so as long as you know how the bullet hell works, you should be able to get a hit in. And even if you do get hit, the ring system is self-forgiving that you can easily tank quite a few. Another 6 hits and Eggman is actually defeated. Once you get the patterns down, it's actually a really easy fight, especially when you realize you can get 2 to 3 hits in on the second phase with the Avatar ability. But despite how simple the cycles are when you get down, this fight still leaves me on the edge of my seat every time I go through it. Now, I'm not stupid. When people talk about hating Superstar's final boss, about how difficult and bullshit completing the campaign is, the Eggman mech is usually not what they're talking about. No, what they mean is this guy. Fang the Hunter is the final boss of Trip's Story, a more difficult campaign that puts your game knowledge and platforming skills to the test. And yeah, difficult might be an understatement. For reference, when I was getting footage for this video, I beat Eggman first try. Against Fang, I died 17 times! And I had beaten him before. This fight alone added over an hour to my footage. Now, I'm not the best at Sonic games, or any video game for that matter, but the difference in difficulty here kinda took me aback, even though I've gone through this before. But let's rewind and actually go over the battle. It takes place in the same arena as the main campaign, except instead of stacked obstacles in the walkway itself is wavy. Fang, rocking a souped-up version of his Marvelous Queen, will first attack by shooting missiles at you. This attack is just a time waster. The missiles are easily avoidable, but Fang is also unable to be hit here, and that's where my biggest criticism of this fight lies. Each time he shoots these missiles, it eats up over 10 seconds of your time, and when he's guaranteed to shoot them every other attack, that leaves well over a minute of just kinda standing around, running maybe, and jumping. And that's if you hit him perfectly with every possible opportunity, which, as we'll see, is really hard to do. At least with Eggman's most common attack, that was how you hurt him. The other attacks where you couldn't hurt him were supplementary and either didn't take up much time or took a fair amount of effort to dodge. With Fang, the attack where you can't hurt him is his most common one, making the fight drag, especially on repeat attempts. I think if this attack was shortened or just removed altogether, the fight would be a lot better and much less frustrating. Between each missile attack, Fang will form a spinning shield of yellow capsules around himself. It starts with 3, but as you get more hits on him, it ramps up to 8. These don't hurt you, but they do fire out and extend into laser rods, which kill you instantly. And yeah, I should probably talk about instant kill attacks now, shouldn't I? Instant kill hazards are a controversial topic in video games, especially with Sonic. A lot of people find it incredibly unfair when an attack looks at your health, goes, "Nah, actually I think you lose here," and kills you instantly. Now, while I understand that sentiment, and can agree somewhat, I don't think instant kill hazards are the main problem. The problem is when a hazard comes out of nowhere, blindsiding you and leaving you no room to dodge or react accordingly. It's why Metroid Dread's Emmy worked perfectly fine as an insta-kill attack. In fact, it enhances the atmosphere as you sneak around the Emmy zones to avoid them. You can always see them coming, and it never feels like the game's fault when they catch you. With Sonic, instant death hazards are incredibly alluring to developers because they're the one thing that can circumvent one of the series' biggest issues, the overly forgiving health system. In Sonic games, unless you're going for the highest score, an extra life, or in certain games special stages, you can just that your way through most stages and bosses. If you've ever watched Box 12's video on Sonic Lost World's Rage Quit Zone, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Getting hit serves no real punishment besides not getting a perfect score, which most people don't care about, locking you out of a special stage, which is only relevant in the first 2 games plus Sonic 4, or resetting your chance of getting an extra life, something that this game just doesn't have. Some zones have bottomless pits, ask Stimps about that one, or long stretches without rings and try and deal with this, but most of the time, the rings make any sort of challenge in the game pretty trivial, especially when you can pick any drop ring right back up. In the first 2 games, the developers dealt with this by just not giving you any rings in the final boss arenas. Suddenly, every attack becomes an insta-kill, because you don't have your lifeline to take your hits. I mean, let's face it, for as much trauma as Sonic 2's Death Egg robot caused, that fight would have been pretty easy if the game gave you even a single ring. So yeah, I think as long as it's properly telegraphed, instantly killing you is a totally reasonable punishment for failing to dodge an obstacle, especially when it's a final boss's attack. Now, that doesn't mean that every instant death attack in this fight is free from criticism, but we'll get to that. Back to Fang, the more capsules he fires out, the less protected he'll be. You can either patiently wait for him to fire them all out, or you can time your attacks to hit him while they're spinning around him. They move slowly when launched, so dodging them is so easy. I didn't even know they were an insta-kill attack until I'd beaten the entire game and watched others play the fight. His other attack involves him using these lasers to trap you while he makes clones of himself. Does he have the Phantom Ruby or something? Is that where it ended up? I mean, he has an infinity for gems, so I guess that would make sense. Him and his clones will dive bomb you in a pattern, and the real Fang will knock out the platform he dives into. With incredibly tight timing, you can squeeze a hit in on Fang, but it comes at the risk of failing and falling straight into the pit. Another 6 hits, and oh my god, is he dead? Oh, shit. Second phase, because of course there is, and this is the part that drives people to insanity. We got a glimpse of this mech after Golden Capital Zone's boss in the main campaign. Great memories there, I know. But here it is now, fully painted and ready to destroy. His first attack is easy enough. He shoots out some Anton enemies, and similar to Eggman, you have to run around back and hit them back at him. He has another attack similar to this, where he shoots out bombs that split into red and blue discs. The blue ones are able to be launched back at him, while the red ones hurt you. In between these attacks, however, is the attack that has caused more anguish than any other. Fang will cause 3 electric nets to appear around you for a maximum of 3 times. Running into them will cause Trip to get trapped. Open for Fang to shoot an instant death cork out of his arm cannon. Yeah, the instant kill nature of this attack surprised the hell out of me at first, but upon rematching the fight, I found out several key things. First, the places where the nets appear are consistent every attempt. Every time you fight Fang, they will appear in the same places relative to Trip. The second thing is that the cork will not start firing when you get caught in a net. The cork fires when Trip stands still for an extended period of time. Put these together, and this attack becomes pretty trivial if you know what you're doing. If the reticle lands on Trip, run out of the way. If it doesn't, like what will always happen on his first attack, stand still, wait for Fang to ready his gun, and jump between the nets and get out of the line of fire. Simple as that. If you do get caught, you do actually have a chance of escaping by spamming the jump buttons. But if you want any chance of actually escaping, you better do that soon, and you better do it quick, because you have frames to spare. Throughout this phase, Fang will jump and land heavily, flinging Trip into the air if she's on the ground. This tells you what sort of sub-phase Fang is in. After 3 hits, he enters sub-phase 2. After another 3, he enters his final phase. During this final phase, Fang will start shooting out nets 4 times instead of 3. Because the arena loops, you have to be very careful not to go too fast during this attack, or you'll end up running into the nets from the other side. After this, Fang decides he's had enough of attacking from afar and slams his hands on either side of the screen, then crashes his head down into the center, leaving 3 to 4 footholds left to bop him on the head. Yeah, remember when I said I disliked instant death moves that weren't telegraphed well? Well, here's your example, and it seems to be the attack that people take the most amount of issue with, myself included. If they had put a reticle where his head was going to crash down, or had him charge up the slam a bit more, or hell, put up the notice in the corner for the slow emerald ability to give you more time to react, then sure, this attack would be fine. But they don't do that, and that makes it the absolute worst attack in this fight. Luckily, as long as you hit him at every opportunity, he only does this once, so please make sure to hit him at every opportunity. After the 9th hit of Phase 2 and the 15th hit total, Fang's unnamed robot goes down and you've officially beaten the hardest boss, possibly in the entire series. Now, as I have said before, I do not think these battles are perfect, and I understand the issues people have with them. Not only can they suffer from the wait time issues that plague most of this game's other bosses, but they're incredibly difficult challenges with instant death attacks in a game that doesn't often take off its training wheels. Sonic isn't typically a difficult franchise, and it doesn't need to be. While I enjoy the sadistic challenges of Sonic Unleashed's Eggman Land, that doesn't mean I can't enjoy a nice breezy jog through City Escape. But when a game does decide to challenge me, I find myself having a blast. One of my favorite things to do in games is throw myself at a boss over and over, analyzing its attack patterns and using that information to form a strategy to finally get in that last hit. Sonic Superstars forewent the life system of previous 2D games, and while I was initially hesitant about that, since I enjoy collecting lives in Sonic games, when it comes to these bosses, yeah, that was a good move, because it allowed them to make bosses with that design. It honestly reminded me of Metroid's boss design, which, much like these fights, typically has you retrying them over and over in order to make your own strategy around the attack patterns. Now, am I saying that Superstar's final bosses are as hard or even as good as those like Metroid Primes or Dreads? No, not at all. Compared to a Metroid game, Sonic Superstars is a brisk run in the park. But the same idea applies to both, and it's why I find these bosses so fun. An often proposed fix for these fights is to put a checkpoint in between the 2 phases, and while I do think that would help with a lot of players' complaints, I feel like that's a band-aid solution that would ruin the tension these fights currently have. Getting to the end of these fights is so rewarding because messing up means going right back to the beginning. It would be like if there was a checkpoint between each of Ravenbeak's phases in Metroid Dread, it would ruin the fight's atmosphere. If Arzest or Sonic Team ever wants to do something like this again, I'd say all they need to do is cut out the wait times and make sure any instant death attack is properly telegraphed, and I think a lot less people would complain. As for difficulty, I don't think that's an issue on its own. The issue is that the game doesn't properly prepare you for the sudden spike in difficulty. All the other zones, heck, even Egg Fortress, are pretty easy in the grand scheme of things. Again, a lot of that is due to Sonic's lenient health mechanic, but if some zones near the end had more intricate platforming challenges and bosses with well-telegraphed instant kill moves, or the difficulty curve would be a lot more gradual, and I think fans would have a much better time. Or maybe they just complain that the rest of the game is too difficult, who knows. But in the end, I don't think these bosses are nearly as bad as people say they are. Their issues are just symptoms of things the entire rest of the game suffers from. But if you can deal with that, I think you'll find screen KOing Fang at the end to be one of the most rewarding moments in the series.